a good day. Yeah, it's a beautiful day outside. I love my favorite seasons are the transition from winter to spring and the fall. And I love the changing of seasons and life, and everything is, right now there's a lot of that going on. All right. We're going to see if this thing is going to cooperate with me. It was shutting down on me earlier. Hopefully it'll stay so you don't have me rambling. This is my roadmap. All right, well, Shabbat Shalom again, and I'm so glad that we can join together and worship the Lord and come to draw near to Him as He draws near to us. And this week we're continuing on. We're kind of coming to the end of this topic that we've been discussing of being emotionally healthy and spiritually strong. And we've covered quite a bit of ground so far. So we start off by talking about how we need to understand and in some cases break the power of the past of our life. And we looked at a lot of biblical examples, Jacob and Joseph and David, and we looked at how we need to recognize that how we were raised and how significant instances and experiences have shaped who we are. Then we looked at how we could be broken, vulnerable, and strong all at the same time. We talked about the idea that society will say, well, you've got to be tough and you can't admit weakness, but that when we admit our weakness, that allows God to come in and to be strength for us, and that's actually the stronger position to be willing to be vulnerable and to admit brokenness. And we then moved on to this idea of limits, of receiving the gift of limits, and that limits start with God, that He gives limits, that the Bible, the Torah, Scripture says, these are the limits that I've put in place, that God says, this is how you are to live your life, this is how to treat each other, this is how to approach me, this is what to do with your money, this is what to do with your time. And God says all these, here's limits, and how that's good and healthy and right for us and how we need that. And then the next week, Judy talked to us about natural limits and knowing our own limitations and trying to live a life of reasonableness, I guess we could say, trying not to do too much, try not to overextend ourselves, and Shabbat is actually part of that, right? Where we once a week we rest, and Shabbat isn't just to cease, right? The Sabbath isn't just about ceasing, but it's about drawing near to God and drawing near to God with other people. So that's why we're here. This is great. So then we moved on from that to embracing grieving and loss. We talked about why grieve, why embrace loss, why fully experience the losses that we have that might seem piddly or insignificant, but we need to recognize them and accept them and work through them so that we can have a healthy life, to be emotionally healthy, so we don't have baggage weighing us down. And then the next week we looked at how do we grieve. What are some ways that we can grieve appropriately and properly? And we looked at how King David even had the Israelites grieve for Saul, and he gave them the words and said, we're going to stop, we're going to grieve, and we're going to experience this fully before we move on. So all of these things we were talking about, like at the beginning, and we also were talking about the idea of our emotions being, I can't believe I almost forgot this one. We were talking about our emotions being like onions or ogres, right? That there's layers to ogres, there's layers to onions, there's layers to our emotions, and asking the why questions and hard questions like why? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I doing this? Why do I want to, honk my horn at this guy or do something else? And so we kind of pull back the layers of our emotions and figure out, get at the underlying reason and get to the heart of the matter, and then we can deal with that and move on. And so far we've been talking about, everything that we've been talking about with being emotionally healthy and spiritually strong has been really focused on the man or the woman in the mirror, right? When we go and we look in the mirror, we say, okay, well, everything we've talked about is how can we be ourselves a healthy and whole person. And today we're going to turn that around and say, okay, how can I interact with people in a healthy way? And specifically, how can we communicate? How can we have a healthy, strong communication with one another? So we are going to talk about healthy communication. We're going to talk about why have healthy communication in the first place. And I think one of the things with this is that this is one of those issues. Besides, in Leviticus 19 it says everyone should speak frankly with his neighbor, right? Not to bear a grudge, not to cause your neighbor to incur sin because of you. But it says this is one of the only things that God says about how to have healthy communication with one another. And there's a few other things, but more or less it's don't gossip about them, speak frankly and openly, be forthright, and there's not a whole lot more said about that. But I think that there are other things that God says about how we should interact with one another. And I think that the greatest thing, Yeshua says, a new command I give to you, that you love one another. And I think that's what healthy communication is all about. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13 says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Right? It's all for naught. And then he goes on to say, this is what love is. This is how we're defining love. He says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And so we're going to talk about this morning communication through this lens of love. Right? How do we communicate with each other and those in our lives in the most loving way possible? And I think the first thing in communicating is that we need to listen. Right? When a child is born, they don't come out just yabbering, right? They're not just jabbering about everything all the time. They're quiet. Well, they do cry. But when they're learning to communicate, how do they learn to communicate? Right? By listening. And they hear what their parents are saying and those around them, and then eventually they start to understand, oh, there's meaning to these words, and they understand that meaning. And then after a while, they start to try to speak back, right? And say, this is what I want. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I want to communicate, besides just crying. And so the first thing I think that we need to do when we want to communicate with other people through love is that we need to listen. And we need to listen so that the other person feels heard and valued. And we have to listen so the other person feels heard and so that they feel valued. Right? Otherwise, what's the point? So the first step in listening so the other person feels heard and valued is a secret that's been hidden for hundreds of years, if not longer. The secret is so astonishing that once you hear it, you're going to wonder how you ever got on without knowing it, practicing it, and leaning on it in times of relational stress and excitement alike. The secret has turned the hearts of kings and directed the course of nations, and it's even helped turn rebellious kids into little angels, difficult spouses into the perfect match once again. The secret, the first step of listening so that the other person feels valued is this. Just listen. That's it. Just listen. Because, well, for a lot of reasons, I want to make sure I get my notes because I'm going to... Right, when we listen, we're telling the other person, you are important to me. You have value. You are more important than whatever else I could be doing right now, and I'm going to honor you in that way. Listening is not pausing between perfecting your argument and how you're going to answer the other person. It's not just waiting for the other person to take a breath so you can jump back in and get it on the action and, this is what I want you to hear, right? We're listening, and we're not just listening enough so that we can counter the other person's argument if that's the kind of conversation we're having. Jacob, the book of Jacob, chapter 1, says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger." You already know this. I'm going to tell you anyway. Right? Everybody should be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. This reminds me of an old saying that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Right? Has anybody ever said that to you? This is how I know that saying, right? Like, Mark, you got 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth. Pay attention. So when we're listening, we're listening to understand what the other person is saying. We're listening to hear their heart, and so that we can know what they're thinking and feeling. Right? We want to know them, just like we want to be known, just like we want to be accepted. We want the other person wants to be known and accepted, and listening is the first step. We want to listen to identify with them, to know where they're coming from, to see their perspective. And in short, we're listening so that we can step into their world, so that we can walk in their shoes for a minute, just so to speak. So, step 1 is to listen, and to actually listen to what the person is saying so we can hear them. Some principles around this are to listen more than we speak, as we've, 2 ears, 1 mouth, that whole thing. That we shouldn't presume to know what the other person is trying to communicate ahead of time, before they finish. And I think, this is actually one that's a little hard for me, especially with my kids. They come up, they say, "Dad, and you just told me, you told me this thing 20 times in the last week. I know exactly what you're going to say. The answer is the same as it was the other 19 times. No." Right? Just, we're not doing it until, but now if I do that, then my kid doesn't feel valued, right? They don't feel like, "Dad, you're not listening to me. I wasn't even going to say that." Right? "Dad, I wasn't even going to say that." Anyway, so this is one of those that I need to work on. I'm still working on. So we need to listen to the other person's non-verbal cues, right? Their body language, their tone of voice, eye contact, that sort of thing. So we can pay attention to say, okay, well, their words are saying this, but her words are saying it's fine, but, right? Husbands, am I the only one? Okay, I'm probably the only one, but, she said I could, now she's upset. Go figure. I wasn't listening, right? I wasn't paying attention to the tone of voice and everything else that had led up to that moment. We need to give the other person our undivided attention, right? This goes to this previous point of paying attention to everything, and it's really hard for me to pay attention to your cues and your body language and all that if I'm, constantly being distracted by other things. We never want to assume something about the other person, especially something negative, right? Instead, we want to listen for things that are clearly stated by whoever we're speaking with. And if they didn't say something, try not to assume it's there, right? Try not to read between the lines too much. We also need to ask for clarification when we're not clear on something that another person is saying instead of trying to fill in the blanks, right? It goes along with assumption. We want, what, this is what I think you're saying, and you said this, but I really think that you're getting at this. And then they can say, well, no, that's not what I meant at all. And then they can elaborate and explain. My wife and I do that a lot, where I'm like, okay, what I hear you saying is, you don't want me to do all these other things. She's like, no, I just want this one thing. Okay, we're good. Perfect. Now we're on the same page. This is a big one. We need to be aware of our primary defense mechanisms when we're under stress, right? Is our primary defense just to strike back and say, no, it's not like that? Or is our primary defense mechanism just to, okay, whatever? Shut down? Like, what do we do when we're under stress, when we're in an argument? Do we just kind of just let them keep talking and now we're, just off somewhere else? Right? So we need to recognize this, right? This is going back to understanding ourselves. This is why we need to understand ourselves so we can interact with other people better in a more healthy way, so that we can say, okay, I'm not going to just react quickly. I'm not going to shut down. I'm not going to be distracted, but I'm going to, okay, I know that's my tendency, so now I'm going to work to be engaged. And then we need to ask questions instead of trying to read their mind, right? There's a few of these that are kind of revolving around some key points, but we need to ask questions instead of trying to read their mind, especially if we've known them for a long time, and maybe we're married to them. I don't know. If we've known somebody for a long time, we're very close, we have a tendency to just assume that we know what they're saying. Okay, I know exactly what you're thinking, and sometimes that's good. What we're talking about here is when we're having maybe an unpleasant conversation, we want to just give them the benefit of the doubt and not assume something and just let them explain it to us, right? Because maybe we're wrong. And then finally, we don't want to interrupt or simply, like I said earlier, wait for openings so we can get our point across. We need to let the other person fully express themselves, fully get out what they were trying to communicate to us. And we might even say, okay, so is there anything else you want me to know? Right? Is there anything else to this? Should I, is there something else that you haven't said yet? Right? Give that person ample opportunity. There's a gentleman, I don't know quite how to say his name. His name is Henry Nouwen. I don't know. N-O-U-W-E-N. He's not English. Anyway, he says to care, first of all, to care means, first of all, to be present with each other, right? We're talking about communicating through love. To care, first of all, means to be present with each other. From experience, you know that those who care for you become present with you. When they listen to you. When they speak to you. Their presence is a healing presence because they accept you on your terms and they encourage you to take your own life seriously. Right? He's saying this, when somebody cares about you because they're fully listening, they're fully present, they're fully engaged with you. And that's how we want to interact with other people, right? We want other people to feel fully engaged. We want other people to feel valued so that when we're communicating with them, that they receive that from us. And now we can build trust and we can our relationship can progress. Proverbs 17, 27 and 28 says, a man of knowledge restrains his words, and a man of understanding keeps a cool head. And even a fool is considered wise if he keeps silent, and discerning when he holds his tongue. Right, so even if we don't know what to say or do, or maybe we have a lot we want to say and get across, by holding back a little bit, helps us to be perceived a little bit better. Going back to Jacob, 1:19 says, this you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Right? You already know this, he says. The book of Jacob, we spent, over a year going through Jacob, or James, but we spent a long time going through the book of Jacob, the book of James, and so much of what he says is so practical. Look, just do this. Just treat each other. Just quit setting your world on fire by the things that you say, right? Quit doubting that God is going to give you what you're asking for. Just believe that when you ask him for something, he hears you and he's going to give it to you. And if you don't, if you're tossed back and forth, you're not going to get anything. So he says, this you already know what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Why does he say that? Why does he say you've got to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry? You already know this because he knows that this isn't our natural tendency. Right? There's a big difference between knowing what to do and then actually doing it. And so he says, you already know this. I'm going to tell it to you again because you need to hear it, right? Because you need to practice this more than you are. So how many of us have heard that we need to listen more, we need to listen well, we need to be better listeners, right? I've heard this a lot. And it doesn't just make me a better listener by knowing that I need to be a better listener. It takes some work. Right? I've got some action that I need to do. I've got something I've got to put into it. And how many of those that we speak with on a regular basis would say, you know what, you're just an amazing listener? And this could be true, but I would like to say that, oh yeah, people think I listen really well. But I don't know if other people would say that I listen really well, right? And so why is this? Why is it that it's so hard? Like, and we can look back and say, well, I've gotten a lot better at that, and that could be very true. But we can always probably improve our listening skills. But why is it so hard for us to listen? Like, I mean, maybe I'm the only one. Does anybody else find it a little bit difficult? Just, okay, I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to criticize or judge. We're listening. Just listening. All right? Is that hard for you? It's hard for me too. Yeah. I think that there's one reason, like, I mentioned earlier, one of our tendencies is to, when we're listening to somebody, what we're really doing is we're kind of processing, we're thinking about what we're going to say, how are we going to respond to what they just said, and we might miss something that's in there, and our brain is already going faster than what they're speaking, right? And I think that one of the reasons why it's so hard for us to listen is because we're bored. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not interested in the other person. It doesn't mean that you're uninterested in what they're saying or the conversation, but this is what it means. Scientists have figured out that our brains can listen to somewhere, depending on our personality and other factors, we can listen and comprehend to 300 to 500 words a minute. Okay, 300 to 500 words a minute. At that point, when you're getting up that fast and you're listening, now your brain has to kick in and say, okay, what am I hearing? What does this mean? And it's going fast enough that you're not trying to abandon that thread of thought, so to speak, and go on to something else, just kind of checking back every once in a while. When it's going that fast, you're engaged and you're listening fully. And so they say that we can comprehend that fast, but most people speak about 125 words a minute, unless you're from the South. Then it's a little bit slower. Or if you're from New York, you might talk a little bit faster than the people in the South, because New Yorkers and people in big cities, they like things that are always going and moving and going quickly, and come on, just speak it out, spit it out, I got to get onto something, right? And so there's some variation in there, but the average is about 125 words a minute. And so when we're listening to the other person, we might really want to be engaged. We might really want to be there, and I'm really trying to listen to you. You're going so slow. I'm just, what was on my grocery list? Did we get everything that we needed? And, okay. Yeah, okay, we got to take the kids over on Tuesday to this other, okay. Well, yeah, and so now maybe I missed what you were saying because I was off on something else. And this is a natural thing, right? This is our natural inclination is towards this, right? Thinking about other things. So I want to give us a little bit of a guide to help facilitate healthy communication with one another. And here's the thing is, what we're about to go over isn't something that's just natural to everybody. Some people it's easier than others. But when we do this, when we're making sure, hey, am I doing all of these things, not only is it's going to help us be more engaged, but partly because now instead of my mind working on other things while I'm kind of listening to you, now my mind is working on being engaged. Right? Now my mind is working on, okay, am I being a good listener with this other person? So, the first step in this healthy communication is to decide who will speak first and who will listen first. Decide who will speak first and who will listen first. And I know this is just like, right? It just blows your mind that we've got to decide who's going to listen and who's going to speak. But this is so important, right? Most of the time somebody comes up and they just start talking to you. But I think if, or you start talking to them, but I think if we make this our first step, okay, we're going to decide who's going to listen and who's going to talk first, I hope that this changes how you approach conversation from here on out, right? It could be you're sitting here, you're working, you're paying attention to something, somebody just walks up and they start talking, you're like, whoa, okay, all right, we're doing this, right? Okay, you're talking, I'm listening, and okay, this conversation is happening, right? All right, let's go, I'm ready. That was amazing. You just step out and you just start talking and you're taking the bull by the horns. All right, I'm listening, right? Like, now this dynamic isn't, yeah, sure, right? But it's like, whoa, okay, something is happening here, right? Now I'm working on engaging with you, and so I want the way that we approach conversations to be, okay, am I talking or am I listening? And okay, you're talking, so now I am listening, and so that when we interact with each other, we don't feel like the other person is rolling over us, right? Trying to talk over us and that sort of thing. And I think that this is like one of those obvious things, but I think so much, it's very simple, but so many times we just kind of skate right by it, and somebody's saying something to us, and well, I'm going to say something back to them, right? We don't let each other finish and get a thought out. And I think also that when maybe you and your spouse, or maybe we're talking to one of our children, we're discussing something, right? Our voices may or may not be elevated. It's hard to figure out who's talking and who's listening, right? So I think the first thing is we need to slow down, and I'm going to listen, or I'm trying to communicate something, and I need you to listen. It's important to decide who's doing the talking and who's doing listening, because otherwise we'll have a yelling match, a silence contest, or some mix thereof, and just like that, now the conversation's over, right? It's broken down. So at the beginning of the conversation, we're going to decide who's going to talk and who's going to listen. It's very important. So when you're doing the listening, or when you're doing the talking, right? Here's some principles. When we're the speaker, we need to use I statements and not you statements, right? I statements and not you statements. In other words, we need to talk about our own words, thoughts, feelings, desires, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to turn around and accuse, you did this, you said that. You can say, you know what, I felt like, I thought, I want, right? Because now when we start accusing the other person, now we're contributing to a breakdown in communication. First is speak using I statements. Number two is that we need to keep our statements brief, right? This isn't an hour-long dissertation. I'm going to tell you everything that I want, need, and think and feel, right? But I'm going to say, okay, this is what I was thinking, this is what I was feeling, and we need to remember that the other person is working to listen to you, Right? When I'm telling you all of my stuff, I'm great. Like, I'm engaged. This is what we're doing. I'm expressing myself. We have to remember the other person is literally working to listen. One of the other things that scientists have found that I meant to mention earlier is that listening well actually causes fatigue, right? Just like when I go outside and I mow the lawn, I dig a ditch, whatever we might do, it's physically taxing to actually listen. And it's because we're trying to, our bodies, our minds just keep trying to go off and do other things, and we keep bringing it back. No, we're doing this, right? So we have to remember the other person is working to listen to us, and so we want to make it easy for them. We want to let the other person, we want to pause every once in a while, let the other person paraphrase what we just said, right? Make sure that they're checking in and make sure they're understanding what we're trying to communicate. We need to include feelings in our statements. And I think this is one of those things that's harder for those of us who don't like to admit that we have emotions or don't want to be connected with them or feel like that's just a hot mess. We don't need to go there. But we need to be connected to our feelings. We need to include those in our statements. And part of effectively communicating is letting ourselves be known, and our feelings are a huge part of who we are. And this is one of the reasons why we've talked before about like peeling back our emotions, right? Why am I feeling this? Why am I thinking this? Why do I want this? And kind of asking these penetrating questions so that when we get to the point where I'm expressing my feelings to you, it's not a fire hose and I'm not trying to like knock you down. But now, okay, I'm being honest, but I'm being respectful, and that's the last one, is that we also need to be honest, clear, direct, and respectful. Honest, clear, direct, and respectful. Some of us are really, really good at being honest. Some of us are really, really good at being very direct. Like, this is what I want, and right? And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to be honest, clear, and direct and maintain respectfulness for the other person. Right? But that's like this basis of interactions, that we need to show each other respect. I think it's especially difficult, and as we're going through these, I think one of the most difficult, it's the most difficult to communicate well with those who are the closest to us, right? Maybe our spouse, maybe our kids, maybe other relatives, and those are relationships that we want to maintain, and we want to keep good, that we want to be healthy for long term. And so it's really important that we maintain respect, that familiarity with these people doesn't, as the saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt, right? We want to maintain our respect for one another, mutual love and respect. And if we want the other person to listen to us well, we also need to speak well, which includes speaking respectfully to the other person. All right, so there's the bullet points for when we're the listener, right? We're decided who's the listener, when we're speaking, right? We decide who the speaker is, who the listener is. So now, what if we're listening? Okay, what do we do when we're listening? Number one, we fully engage, right? Give that person our full attention. Like, we need to discipline ourselves that we're not just thinking about a rebuttal, that we're listening to the other person and we're going to be fully present for whatever you're saying to me. I'm going to listen. I'm going to understand where you're coming from. The second one is that we need to step into the speaker's shoes. Whoever's talking to us, we need to step into their shoes. We need to get their perspective. We need to feel the way that they're feeling, at least just for a moment, at least while they're talking to us. Okay, well, instead of thinking of, well, no, I really didn't do that. No, I didn't say that. No, whatever. Or maybe all these other things. Okay, so she's telling me this, and okay, if I was her, what would I be thinking? Right? We need to step in and say, oh, you know what? If I was her, and this is what I knew, that's totally reasonable. Right? I completely understand where you're coming from. Right? This is another thing which we need to We need to validate the other person. And by stepping into their shoes for a minute, it helps us to do that. It helps us to say, you know what? I get it. You're right. I see that from your perspective, that's exactly what it looks like. That makes sense to me. We need to, when we're listening, we need to avoid judging or interpreting, right? We're just listening. We're not making a judgment. We're not making a criticism of what this other person is saying, but we're just listening to them. At some point when they're done talking, then we have a chance to say, okay, now that I have everything that they've said and I have my side, I have their side, now I can make some better judgments on what was going on, but not when they're listening. When they're listening, not when they're speaking, we're listening. And then we need to reflect back to them as accurately as we can what we just heard them say, right? Paraphrase. We need to put what they just said into our own words and say, okay, I think this is what you're saying. What I hear you saying is this thing. So one of the great benefits of that is that now the other person knows that we're really engaged, that we're really listening, and that gives them an opportunity to say, no, I didn't mean that. What I meant was this. What I'm trying to say is this other thing, right? So it helps us to keep our lines straight, to stay connected. And then when you think they're finished, like I said earlier, you can say, okay, is that all you wanted to say? Is there anything else that you want me to know? Right? And this isn't asking them, are you done yet? You done yet? The game is on, or whatever it is, right? Like, are you done yet? That's not what we're saying. We're saying, is there anything else? Right? I'm open. I want you to tell me, is there anything else I should know? And again, going back to respect, and this is a good way to know, okay, give them the opportunity. Now, is there anything else that you want to say? I just want you to, I want to hear it. And then at the end, especially this is really applicable, especially when we're having a very long conversation and we just heard 20,000 things, or it feels like it, or maybe the other person heard us say 20,000 things, and we can say, okay, of everything that you just said, what's the most important thing that you want me to understand? What's the most important thing that you want me to walk away with from that? And a lot of times, all of these things that either we just said or the other person just said really comes down to one issue, like one point. And if we can connect on that one point, then all these other things seem to kind of take care of themselves. So those are some of the guidelines for when we're speaking and when we're listening. And depending on the conversation, I know this week is more of like how to communicate well with Pastor Mark. But I think this is really an important thing, and I think that sometimes depending on the situation as we're going through this, it might make sense to say, okay, let's talk about this for we each have X amount of minutes, right? And I'm gonna talk for like 5, 7, 10 minutes, and then you talk, or you talk for this long. And now I think sometimes if we, especially in the beginning when we're not practiced with that, it feels like a debate. Like, okay, you've got your 3 minutes, and I got my 3 minutes, and we're just gonna listen and rebut and go back and forth. But the idea is not that we're just in this debate going back and forth, but okay, after so long, people just quit paying attention. It's hard to remember, which is a good reminder for me, right? We got to get done here. But after so long, it's hard to keep track. So sometimes it's good to kind of limit the time, or it's up to you. You can keep going, but just a thought. So as your conversation progresses, you want to validate what they're saying, and when you're validating what somebody is saying, you're not saying that I agree with you, right? You're not saying I completely agree with everything that you just said. What you're saying is I understand you, right? I understand why you would think that. I understand where you're coming from. I see your point of view. That makes sense to me. Right? That's really what we're saying is we're touching base and saying, you know what, I get it. And then the next thing, that's validation. The next thing is exploration, right? Somebody, when a conversation, I think those are A10s maybe? Anyway, those are usually pretty loud. All right. So, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. You're listening. Thank you. So one-sided conversations aren't very fun, right? When we're in a conversation with somebody else, we want them to contribute to that conversation. And especially if this is an important conversation, it needs to be two-sided. And so we need to explore what the other person is saying. So they just got done talking to us, and they might have said quite a bit, and there's a few things that we can do to have them elaborate on something that we need to know more about, okay? So one of the, and the important thing also is that these are ways to do it in a non-confrontational way, right? Like, there's lots of ways we don't need to talk about how to stir the pot, so to speak, and kind of what do you mean by that, right? Like, we're not going to, that's the only thing I'm going to say. But we're not going to go down that path, but there's a couple ways that are really helpful for getting more information in a diffusing kind of way. So the first one is called mirroring. And we kind of touched on it in the list of things to do when we're listening, but the first one is called mirroring. And mirroring is when we repeat the last few words, like 1 to 5 words that the other person just said, and we say it as a question and wait for them to reply. So you might say, what, I hurt you? Oh. And then, well, yeah. And then they'll go on and tell you about it, right? And now you can understand, okay, well, what did I do to cause that, and how did that come about? I have not awesome examples here, but like, you wanted me home earlier? Well, yeah, I wanted you home earlier. Here's all the reasons why, right? This is, I thought I communicated to you, and I thought, this, and then, oh, well, okay, well, I didn't realize that. I thought, right? Now we're having a productive conversation, right? Where I'm understanding why something might be the way it was from your perspective, and you're understanding why I thought and we weren't intentionally trying to cause harm to the other person. So I hurt you. You wanted me home earlier. Whatever the conversation might be, you didn't think I was listening. You wanted to eat the last piece of cheesecake from your surprise party the other day that your best friend put together and savor the memory of feeling loved by everybody. And you're ever so slightly miffed that I ate it first. Right? That's not quite mirroring, but you get the idea. So the first thing to talk to somebody and say, okay, get them to expound a little bit is mirroring. The second one is by simply asking, what makes you say that? Right? And again, it's not, well, what do you mean by that? Right? We're not asking, why do you say that? Or why did you do that? What made you do that? What makes you say that? Right? There's a big difference between asking why and asking what. Right? Asking why puts somebody on the defensive, and now I have to defend myself and explain to you all the reasons why I did this, because obviously you don't get it. But when we say what's neutral? Like what makes you say that? And again, tone of voice, all that kind of stuff, all these other things with tone of voice and body language, that all comes in. But when we say, what? Okay, well, what makes you say that? What makes you think that? What made you do that? Now they can explain, okay, kind of the situation, and this is what was going on, and this is why I thought that. And when we ask this what question, we're saying, what you thought and what you did and what was going on in the situation is important to me. Help me to understand. Right? We're inviting them to explain more and to help us come into their world a little bit more, a little bit better. And it invites them to reveal more to us. So I recognize that this morning was a little bit of a departure. Usually we have a lot more scripture and we're going through a lot more of the Word of God, but I think that it's important that we understand how to relate with one another, how to communicate with each other in a healthy and in a good way, and that whether it's people in our home, whether it's people at our job that we work with, that we need to exercise this, that we need to practice good communication habits out of love, right? That we are, as believers, we're called to love one another. We're called to love God. We're called to love one another, and we're called to love those around us. And the way that we communicate affects that a lot. Affects how we're perceived by the world around us, and really by extension, even how God is perceived once people know that we are his ambassadors. I want to read 1 Corinthians 13 again. He says, if I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, but I have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, or do not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast, is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And I would add that love communicates well. Love listens well, and it speaks well to other people. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the guidance that we have from your word. Thank you that you didn't just tell us to love one another and to love those around us without giving us a good example. And I pray that you would, Lord, as we go about our life, from not just from today, but from now on, that you would help us to remember how to communicate lovingly with those around us. And I pray that you would help us to be disciplined, to hold back when we want to jump in, and to examine ourselves and say, why am I saying this, and how can I say this in a loving and respectful way? And I pray that you'd help us to engender and foster healthy relationships with our spouses, with our kids, with our friends and other family members, and with those around us every day. God, I pray that as we do, that you would receive honor, that you would receive glory, that you would strengthen your people, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, yeah, go ahead. I guess you're all standing. If you're not standing, you can stand. So after the service, we have Oneg in I don't know what room this is, what we call it. It's the Oneg room. And this is one of the values that we have here at Kehillat Yeshua, is that we try to engender community, which is one reason why we're talking about this emotionally healthy and spiritually strong. So I would encourage you to stick around and get to know somebody, let somebody get to know you. And if you can't, it's no big deal. But anyway, if you can, it would be wonderful. All right. Yevarechecha Adonai vayishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav elecha vihuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha vayasem lecha. Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Now may the Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua, amen. All right. Lord bless you. You are dismissed.